Hello, everyone, and welcome to our December Teaching and Learning for Student Success Monthly webinar series. This month's webinar features one of our original peer mentors, Dr. Linda Hagedorn. And without further ado, I would like to now introduce Dr. Linda Hagedorn. Dr. Hagedorn is Associate Dean of Undergraduate Programs, International Programs, Student Services, Diversity, and Community in the College of Human Sciences and a professor in the School of Education at Iowa State University. She is a prominent researcher in the area of community college student success and international education with over 200 publications and presentations. She has worked with universities in Vietnam and Indonesia. Currently, she is funded by the U.S. Department of State and the U.S. Embassy in Beijing to be the American Director of the American Cultural Centers at Hainan Normal University and Harbin University of Science and Technology in China. She is a past president of ASH and a former vice president of AERA, Division J, and the president of the Iowa Academy of Education. And now I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Hagedorn.
Okay, thank you. So is my screen now active? It is, okay.
Yes.
Great. Okay. All right, well, yes, it's my pleasure certainly to talk to you about transfer, and I hope you'll allow me to kind of present a different approach to looking at community colleges and transfer students. Now, you may notice that I have a picture of the Declaration of Independence on the screen, and I do place it there for several reasons. First of all, it's a document that describes and highlights our country, and it's also, something that makes America free, and it's our identity. And community colleges are also our identity and also American. And I'd like to now switch to the promise that we have in the Declaration of Independence that states, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness." Now you'll notice I wrote in red the pursuit of happiness, because the Declaration does not promise us happiness. It only promises the pursuit of it. And that's very important to kind of keep in mind. And so since the Declaration of Independence and our community colleges are so American, I thought I would write a Declaration of Community College Student Success. And here we have, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that while all community college students do not enter the college with equal readiness, abilities, or psychological frameworks, that all are endowed through the community college mission with certain unalienable rights, that among these are post-secondary access and the pursuit of success." So community colleges have been established to provide access to students who would otherwise not be able to enter post-secondary education. But we can't promise them success. We can only promise them the pursuit of success, that they have the right to find that success, and it's up to them. So it's the pursuit of success that I want to really concentrate on. Now, community colleges are quite different from their four-year counterparts. They're newcomers to the field. If you go to the university, you see pomp and circumstance, and I have that picture there of faculty in those robes from the 15th century or whatever. But community colleges are newcomers to this system and very different and don't date back to the 17th century. They're designed to serve the common citizen, not the elite. And in our history, that's what four-year universities were designed to do, to educate the elite. Now, community colleges have come a long way since their earliest addition to our post-secondary structure. And there's been a lot of changes and a lot of different names applied to these institutions. Some have been called and continue to be called junior colleges, community colleges, city colleges, county colleges, technical institutes, branch colleges, associates colleges, or even just state colleges, which is the way Florida entitles all of their community colleges. Because they have some four-year degrees, they drop the community college nomenclature entirely. Now, as you can tell from all these different names and all these different designations, there's a little bit of a identity crisis, perhaps, and that community colleges are not really sure who they are and what they are. They do all establish their role as serving students and providing often that first entrance into post-secondary education. But we really see that community colleges are really evolving and continue to evolve. Now, anybody who studies community college is familiar with the terms transfer swirl. And because transfers and community college students tend to swirl and whirl and twirl. They go from one institution to another. It's not uncommon for students to attend more than one community college at the same time, especially those in urban environments. And it's also not uncommon, actually it's quite common, for students to transfer into the community college. We often talk about transfer going from 2-year to 4-year, but in many cases, the flow from 4-year back to 2-year, and then perhaps back to 4-year again, can be a lot stronger than that flow, that one-way flow from 2-year to 4-year. So, a couple of important statistics. Nearly 60% of traditional age undergraduates attend more than one institution. Now, that's across the country, all post-secondary students. And nearly 1/4 of transfers from the 4-year leave the state. That's important to remember. But the community college is the top destination for transfer students from 4-year institutions, with 53.7% moving to a 2-year. So when students transfer from a 4-year, more than half are going to a 2-year college. We often call that reverse transfer, but it's certainly an understudied phenomenon and one that occurs very, very common. Now, to understand that graph that I have on the screen, what it's entailing is the proportion of all students who transfer in. So at public 2-year, for that very first column that shows 35.6%, of all public 2-year institutions, 35.6% are coming in with some transfer credits, or coming in, they're not full-time, first-time students. They've been somewhere else first. And 3.9% have actually attended or have a post degree. So these are students with bachelor's degrees already coming back. So that's how you read that graph. And you can see that among private nonprofit, 53% of students that transfer in come in with some other kinds of credit. So this is part of that swirl and whirl, that students are not coming into one institution and staying for the entire time. That transfer, typically a 2-year idea or 2-year function, occurs almost as often at the 4-year level as well. Retention rates. Here's an area where when we talk about and think about community colleges, the retention rates in comparison to their 4-year counterparts are not as high. The graph that I have on the screen, which is very new data from the academic year 2013 to 2014, on the left is 2-year institutions, and the total year-to-year retention is about 61%. And it hovers pretty much the same across all different types of 2-year institutions. When we look at the 4-year, the purple graph is divided into 3 parts. The all acceptance for colleges with all acceptance rates, then the middle one is open admission, and then the last is less than 25% accepted. In other words, when you look at that triad, the tallest column indicates the most selective institutions. You see 96%. That's an awfully high retention rate. But we're talking here about institutions like Harvard and Yale and Columbia and UC Berkeley and institutions like that. When you look at the open admissions 4 years, well, their retention rates are about exactly the same as the community colleges. Now, this is important to keep in mind because, you know, the best measure of what comes out is what comes in. And so if community colleges had the same kind of restrictive admissions as Harvard did, then they'd have 96% retention rates too. So, you know, it's the open access, that part of the mission that makes community colleges so strong, that also may work against them when we look at retention rates. Because the students who come to community colleges often come, or do come, with their baggage. That maybe their GPAs were not as high in high school, maybe their ACT scores were not as high, or they're older, or they have families, or they're working. And all of these types of things work against them for retention. Now, I couldn't find newer data on this, so this is a little bit old, but nonetheless, I think it's important to look at this. And that is the proportion earning a baccalaureate depending on where a student begins and their ethnic heritage. Now, when we look at 4-year, you know, we just saw that retention rates. But here we're looking at gaps, ethnic gaps. What is the different rates by different groups? And we see that 77% of the whites will earn a baccalaureate that start at a 4-year, 61% of the Hispanic students, Latino students, and 63% of the African Americans. But when we shift to those students who start at a community college, we're talking about now students who not only transfer, but also earn a baccalaureate. That number gets reduced very quickly to only 37% of the white students, 26% of the Hispanics, and only 9% of the African Americans. So we can see a very wide gap, not only by ethnicity, but also by where students start. And we go back to that idea of, well, they're starting at these institutions because they're starting at different places in their academic preparation. Now, the community college enrollment has been rising steadily. This year, we're beginning to see a little bit of a drop, but up until this year, community colleges have been growing exponentially. And the reason for it is because more and more students are obviously interested and realize what the community colleges have to offer. Certainly there's increased student aspirations, and almost all high school graduates say they want to pursue higher education, and larger proportions are actually doing that right out of high school. Other reasons are societal changes that allow or promote people older to return to community college, or to return to college, to post-secondary education. There is a growth among traditionally underrepresented groups, so more students of color and low-income students do go to community college. When there's changes in the job market, people often will come for additional training. And the economic drivers that we know that the more college or the more training that a person has, the more likely that their income will be highest for the duration of their lives. So here's a kind of a growth span showing the growth of numbers of students. And you can see that if we look at that top line of that graph, all races and ethnicities, from 1993, the number has increased from 8.6 million to 12.5 million. And if you look at the next line, which is the white students, you can see sort of a somewhat steady growth, little ups and downs. And as I said, things are going down a little bit right now. But if you look at the other lines below it, you'll see definite increases in the number of Hispanic and Black and Asian students that are attending college. And many of these students are those that begin at the community college. So that's the greatest expansion of students of color. Now, there are elite institutions that do indicate that they are very interested in expanding their enrollments of students of color and low-income students, despite those that the super elite colleges talking about it. They have not necessarily altered their admission standards to accommodate the latest diversity of college aspirants. So, you know, although there is a lot of talk about the upper Ivy League institutions opening their doors to more students of color, you know, it's very difficult for most students to get into those institutions. And even if they do, it's hard to stay because the programs of support may not be sufficient to allow them to be successful. Just a little bit more about that growth, and here I show numbers from 1965 to 2014, and you can see in the first set of four-year institutions how the number has grown. In 2014, four-year has gone down a little bit, but you see that steady rise from over not quite 4 million to well over 10 million students in four-year institutions. And then at the second side, or to the right-hand columns, we see the two-year institutions, and look at that growth. It's really been astronomical, and really, you know, just holding that number is certainly a chore. But there is some slight decreases that community colleges are seeing now, but the numbers are certainly still very, very high. And why do we see a little bit of slight decrease? Well, when we break down that admission by income level of who's going to college, we see that lately, in the later years, 2012, 2013, which is as far as this particular graph goes, we see the greatest decrease in low-income people. There's decreases across the board, but the gap is increasing. The gap is increasing. So what predicts transfer? Well, gender. Females are more likely to transfer than males. Parent education plays a role in this transition as well as others. Parents with higher educations tend to have, or students with parents of higher education are more likely to transfer. Age plays a role, and sometimes it's positive and sometimes it's not. It depends. Sometimes we see more traditionally aged students transfer, but when older students want to transfer, they tend to do a fairly good job as well. We've already looked at race and ethnicity and know that there is significant gaps. It depends on the curriculum that students had in high school. If they've had a rigorous high school curriculum, they're more likely to transfer. They're better prepared. High school GPA plays a role. College involvement, the kind of grades they get in community college, their educational expectations or their goals, their locus of control, in terms of colleges, their greater exposure to full-time faculty, and developmental remedial needs. Students who have developmental or remedial education are less likely to be able to transfer. You know, we often hear of all the names that community colleges are called, that they're two-year colleges. And nothing could be further than the truth. They're not two-year colleges. That's the biggest misnomer in the country, I think. Because the majority of students who do transfer to a four-year university are enrolled significantly longer than 2 years. It takes many students a very long time to get out of community college. First of all, many, and in some cases most, are working and therefore are only going to college part-time. So of course you can't finish community college going part-time in 2 years. And then there's that remedial education problem. When students must start in remedial education or developmental education, it may take a year or two or more for them to get through that pipeline into college level classes so that they can take the credits that they need to be successful. In one study that I did, using the Los Angeles Community College District, the 9 colleges. There were over 5,000 students that we studied. The average time to transfer was 11 semesters because most of these students were deep in remediation, were going part-time, and may take off a semester or two here and there. So it takes a long time. Now, all of this that we've discussed or that I've presented makes it easy to see that community college students are at a disadvantage when it comes to their success or when it comes to measuring how many get a bachelor's degree. Now, there have been a lot of studies done by renowned researchers, actually, who have studied this, and they come up with this term or this explanation, that students who seek a 4-year degree become disadvantaged if they begin their studies at a community college. What they're saying is that students shouldn't go to community colleges. Why don't they just all go to 4-year colleges? Then they'd be much better off and more likely to transfer. Now, those of us who study community colleges and those of us who understand the system know that's laughable, because students with backgrounds more likely to add difficulty in getting a bachelor's degree are more likely to attend a community college. It's not the college that disadvantages them. It's their experiences or their lack of experiences and their lack of preparation. You know, not their fault, but that's the reason that they go to community colleges. So if one were to read the literature, you'd get an entirely reversed idea of what's going on in those colleges, and gee, why aren't they successful? Those colleges must not be doing a good job. There's also, you know, sometimes community colleges are used as a joking matter. You know, they only are going to community college. And I just copied a couple of things off the internet. Community college, there's a lot worser ways to disappoint your parents. Or this joke about the time spent in community college, and you can see that it's finding a parking spot and driving to school are the most, and doing homework and learning are the least little slices of that pie. I mean, you know, this is meant to amuse people and make fun of community colleges. That's the picture that community colleges really have to correct and have to fight. But, you know, again, going back to that, whose fault is this? Or why aren't community college students as likely to graduate with a bachelor's degree than their 4-year counterparts? Well, it's because 4-year institutions, at least most of them, have the opportunity to reject the applications of those students who they deem likely to fail. Students who are turned down by those institutions are left with only one option, and that may be to go to a community college. And indeed, those students may not be successful. But it's inappropriate and wrong to say that they could have been successful if only they attended a 4-year instead of a 2-year. We can't test that because we don't know if that would be true, and they couldn't get in the 4-year anyway. So here's how I see things. A framework that I think works well when trying to understand community colleges and the students that enroll in them is to think about them using an immigrant type of framework. You know, community colleges are newcomers to the field of education, just like immigrants are newcomers to a new country. And so I think they can be likened to an immigrant arriving to a new country. And every immigrant to a new country comes in sort of at the margins, left at the margins without invitation to join the mainstream. Just as immigrants are catapulted into an existing culture that has a full set of firmly established customs and habitual practices, so are transfer students. They are catapulted into an existing culture at that 4-year institution. And, you know, and they are engulfed by these established customs and habitual practices. It's not an easy passage to transfer. Now, what happens to these students? Well, you know, there are different theories on immigrants of what happens to immigrants. And of course, the first is the melting pot theory. And this was popular a while ago, but nonetheless, I mean, the idea of people coming in from different countries and different cultures, they are melted into this progression and become American. I mean, that's what the classical assimilation theory would assume. And this is also what we expect of our transfer students. We expect our transfer students to come into four-year institutions and blend. Just become like all of us. Now there's another theory of immigrant assimilation, and that's called segmented assimilation. And this is a theory that is purported by Porthos and Zhao. And this is about a distinct connection with a purposeful alienation, leading to permanent poverty and membership among an underclass. What this is saying is that people may assimilate, but not into one big pot. They may assimilate into an underclass. And we see this in like ghettos of perhaps immigrants or even African Americans living in one neighborhood. They are not assimilated, so to speak. They've assimilated to an extent, but they are still segmented. And they are alienated from the mainstream. And this can lead and has led to permanent poverty and membership in an underclass. Now there are, a preservation of cultural values. There isn't that complete melted pot where all of the culture just kind of blends with everybody else's and everyone speaks English and everybody eats hot dogs and apple pie. But rather, this is the type of actions that form ghettos and a them versus us type of experience. So, kind of taking this again into our transfer students. I mean, they can be in their, after transfer, segmented into a group that is not completely a part of the four-year institution. And that could lead to, a sort of an underclass. Oh, they're just a transfer student. So, are community colleges equally alienated from the four-year counterparts? And in some cases, I'm going to say, yes, that does occur. Faculty and administrators from the two institutional types rarely meet or network. College and university representatives typically don't attend the same conferences or invited to the same state-level events. There are often questions of course rigor and equivalence, and these are often very sensitive subjects when two-year and four-year institutions are talking about articulation and transfer between their two types. I mean, I can attest to this because I'm on both sides of this. I come to you from Iowa State University, but with a rich background of working with community colleges for over 30 years. And I can tell you many stories of students transferring from the community college, and they have to retake courses like physics or calculus or biology because the faculty in those disciplines don't believe that the course in the community college is good enough or rigorous enough or prepares those students for subsequent courses at the university. The funding and governance structures of the 2- and 4-year institutions are separate. And, so I leave the question, are community colleges seen as an underclass? That's something perhaps to discuss. And then again, back to those transfer students also being purposefully alienated. Are they accepted into the social as well as the academic culture of the 4-year institution? Well, they should be, not always. Are there support systems in place beyond the first few days of the semester? And the answer to that is rarely. And the third question is, are transfer students welcomed or are they tolerated? In many 4-year institutions, when we take in transfer students, it's for one purpose and one purpose supreme, and that is because if we lost some students from the freshman and sophomore first 2 years, there's now openings in our enrollment. And so we may welcome transfer students, but there may not be the welcome because we really value their participation, but rather, well, they can fill up some of those spaces that were left now by students who have left, who were not retained. We may have a few openings in our residence halls and other areas, and so, yeah, sure, they can come. But is the transfer orientation, is the transfer programs as strong as they should be? In most cases, the answer is no. All right, so what would be a better path, a preferred path of a preservation of cultural values and solidarity juxtaposed with positive and harmonious coexistence? This is, again, going back to the work of Zhao and others on immigrants and their different types of assimilation into the mainstream. And they promoted a respected coexistence. In other words, not the melted pot where everybody throws away their past or their cultures or their language, but rather to respect one another and to allow those types of differences to exist, but with the respect that we don't see when we have a segmented assimilation. Without the, ghettos are not respected. Communities of all one type of nationality may not be respected. I mean, there are jokes and other types of negative statements about a Chinatown or a Japantown or a whatever, little Miami. But to respect that people have differences, they want to keep parts of their culture, but are still part of the mainstream. And that's what we want community colleges to be. Yes, they are different, but they need to be respected and not joked. They serve a different community. And without them, we wouldn't have as many students at all getting bachelor degrees and beyond. They have a role to play, but they can't be measured by the same tools that are used to measure the quality of four-year institutions. So the barriers, well, one of the barriers to this theory, I already talked about the readiness gap or the need for remedial developmental education. And you might be able to see from this slide that for institutions that are non-selective, like the community colleges, 60% of students that are certainly there, that attend those types of schools, their readiness gap is much larger than those who attend highly selective institutions. So again, we're putting the least ready students into our non-selective institutions and expecting them to be able to jump over that gap. And this is another reason I believe that community colleges are not given the respect that they deserve. They're seen often as places where, that remediate students that don't have the same type of rigor or the same types of courses. Approximately 40% of all college students must enroll for at least one remedial course, and in some community college districts, that proportion is closer to 80%. So think about that. You add those types of courses to their program, and there's no way they're getting out in 2 years. It's going to take a lot longer, and the longer it takes, the less likely it is that these students will be successful. So community colleges by default or by design are providing the avenue to a college degree by being the brokers of necessary developmental remedial coursework. And as I said before, the more remedial courses a student has to take, the less likely he or she is to earn a degree. And we've got lots of research to back that up. Another thing that sometimes works against students is financial aid. We don't have time to go through this in any great detail. Suffice it to say that less students at the community colleges are getting any kind of aid, although the higher proportions of these students tend to be in low income. So they're less likely to get aid. They're also less likely to even apply for it. Millions of community college students who appear to be eligible for need-based financial aid are not applying for it. That's a statement by the Advisory Committee on Student Financial Assistance. We also know that 55% of all community college students, as compared to 37% of students at four-year institutions, don't even complete a FAFSA. And if you don't complete the form, you can't get any federal aid. And according to data from the National Post-Secondary Study of Student Aid, almost 1/3 of community college students in the $0 to $9,999, in other words, less than $10,000 a year income. Of those students who claim less than $10,000 a year income, that a large proportion of those students don't even apply for aid. 1/3 of the students in that bracket, less than $10,000 a year, actually even applied for any kind of aid. And why is that? They may feel they don't understand eligibility. They may be loan aversive. The open admission processes that allow them to come often allow them to enroll at the last minute, and there's no time to apply for aid. They may be unaware that financial aid is available for community college study, and so on and so forth. And of course, there are some students who can't get federal aid because of their immigrant status. Okay, we're coming up near the end here, but college knowledge capital is another issue. The community college students are less likely to have parents and relatives and other close relationships with people who have been through the college experience, and so they are less prepared for the challenges of college and hence more susceptible to non-success. If they don't have that college knowledge, they may not be knowledgeable about financial aid, and there's nobody there to help them understand that. If parents haven't had that experience, then they don't understand how to help their own students. So I'm running out of time, so I'm going to skip through a couple of these and get right to where we are today. The community colleges do have a lot of programs to help support these students. There are the student success courses and learning communities and specific activities designed to help students, certainly like the Catch the Next and others, but those types of programs reach a small minority of the students who would be helped by those types of supports. Certainly more programs would be highly beneficial to help community college students because, they are the students that are least prepared, and we give them the least amount of support. So, I ask you to kind of think about, where are we today? Are we assimilating? Are we marginal? Are we respected? What is that role? Where are we with respect to that situation? And what does the future hold? Many people believe that the American dream is in peril. Budget cuts and other financial challenges that really hit community colleges hard decrease the possibility of these programs and other types of support. Can student success be increased? I believe it can, but we need to have that right support in the right places to allow community colleges to prepare tomorrow's workers. So I'm going to end with this. We're back to the Declaration of Transfer Student Success, that indeed that students do enter those four-year institutions with equal, they do not enter it with equal readiness, abilities, or psychological frameworks, but they must be endowed with certain unalienable rights, that among these are access, support, and the pursuit of success. And I know that all of you are helping those students in their pursuit of success, and that's where we hope that additional funding and additional attention, like programs like Catch the Next and Puente and others, can continue to help students in their pursuit. And with that, I turn it over to Lydia and the others.
Thank you so much. That was wonderful. That was a lot of great information. And I also am interested to actually hear from our attendees and some of our practitioners to hear, how you see yourselves and how you see your programs at your individual colleges kind of making strides to increase student success, and also whether anyone has thought about some of the issues with the four-year colleges that Dr. Hagedorn spoke about. To what extent when you're looking at colleges, do you think about kind of the assimilation or acculturation aspect of transfer students, and to what extent does that play a role in the selection of four-year universities where you take your students? So I kind of want to open it up to our attendees. What do y'all think? And remember, you can raise your hand or just write me a question using the question pane.
Um, I, as people prepare to make their comments, Lydia, I do want to say thank you to Dr. Hagedorn for joining us this afternoon. We are very fortunate to have her as one of our scholar mentors and a member of our research and evaluation team. I think from her presentation, everyone can see how fortunate indeed we are to have someone of her caliber to be concerned with community college students and education as a whole. And I did find a lot of her comments fascinating. Something that I had not heard about previously was the high number of university students that turned back to community colleges. I believe the percentage was 57%. I never assumed that it was that high. Um, I wanted to ask her a question regarding that, what her thoughts are as to why that is the case. And also in reply to her question about, what do we believe, is the dream accessible? And of course, our name is Dreamcatchers. So as an organization, we do believe in the dream, and that's what we're striving to provide to our students. So once again, thank you. And I'm wondering about your thoughts on the reversal to community colleges from universities.
Sure. Now you have to remember there's different kinds of reverse transfer. When we talk about 57% or 60% of students, many of those are not coming to a community college full time. They may just be coming for a course or two. But many are coming to the 2-year for a full-time enrollment. Students who start at the 4-year and find out they're not as mature as they thought and flunk out often will go to a community college. That's all they're left to do. I know here at Iowa State, when we have students on academic probation, they have to go to the community college and prove themselves to be able before they come back. They have to take a few courses over there and show their ableness. Students sometimes will take courses at the community college because they fear them, such as science course or math course. They may think, and maybe mistakenly think, that it's easier if they take it at the community college. So sometimes they do that. Many are 4-year institution students are what we call summer sessioners. They come to the community college during the summer when they're home to get a few more credits to help them to graduate a little bit sooner. But those are all different aspects of reverse transfer. But many students will leave the 4-year for whatever reason, and usually it is academic, and just go to a community college, and because they could not adjust to the 4-year institution. They may have had issues in the dorms or other places. And so, we see a lot of that with certainly hope that students who go to these community colleges from the 4-year will come back. But some do and some don't. But there's a very high number that will come back and rely on the community college in their pursuit of success.
Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you. Okay, we have a question here. Go ahead, Dan.
Hello, this is Daniel Elias. I work at Palo Alto College. Back in the 1980s, we used to have what was called an open enrollment in community colleges, and even now we have what's called open enrollment. But I think now that we have the open enrollment, but there are certain conditions with that. It seems like the state of Texas is kind of putting more pressure on having completers, and they're basing funding to community colleges based on momentum points or how many people are going to graduate and that kind of a thing. And so it seems that now it seems that there's a movement more toward selective admission. In other words, maybe not let ESL students, English as a second language students, in because they have a higher risk of maybe not completing, or maybe limiting the number of developmental courses because those students are gonna have less chance of completing. Do you see that trend also, around the country?
Well, performance-based funding is what you're talking about.
Right. Yes.
And I actually am very familiar with the Texas momentum points. A colleague of mine at the University of Houston and I just got a paper published looking at using Texas data from community colleges and looking at the amount of performance-based funding that different groups of students will bring to their community colleges. I think that might be interesting for you to read. But the idea of performance-based funding, that's why we're fearful of that, because it does promote the more selective admission of students who are going to bring dollars, because community colleges need those dollars. And so you're not going to want to create environs that are going to attract students who aren't going to provide that funding. You want to have environments that will attract students who will bring in more performance-based funding dollars. So we are seeing that different states are getting onto that bandwagon of PBF, and I think that could be a threat to access for many students. And you're right, there is indeed a move to restrict the amount and the time of remedial education and the depth. I know in Texas there's new movements to remove the lowest levels of remedial and put that into adult basic education.
Correct.
Yeah, and so what does that mean, and what possibilities do those students have of ever entering the college system? Right. So I think we have to be diligent and watch and see what happens. But we certainly want all students to be successful, but we don't want to have a performance-based funding formula that dissuades colleges from being bastions where all students can enter and have a chance to be successful.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan. We're going to go to Yolanda Arena. Go ahead, Yoli.
Hi. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hello. Yes. Thank you, Dr. Hagedorn. That was fascinating information. A lot of things that I hadn't really thought about. But one thing that you mentioned that really resonated with me was the marginalization of our community college students. And I also feel it as a professor, and when I go to universities, oh, you teach at a community college, it almost makes you feel less than faculty at community colleges. But a question that I had is that you mentioned that our transfer students sometimes feel alienated at four-year institutions. What can we specifically do to prepare our students for four-year universities so they won't feel as alienated? Is there any specific strategy that you have in mind?
Of course, that's really difficult because you're preparing. It's just like when we raise our children. We can't be responsible for what our adult children do once they leave the home, and that's unfortunately the same problem we have with community college students once they transfer. They've left the environment, and now they're on their own, so to speak. The best situation would be for programs that start at the community college to be continued on at the four-year institution. Because students who have been used to having supports and used to having people remind them and somebody helping them to pick their classes and doing all of these things, once they get into the four-year, that just doesn't happen. So, whatever we can do to prepare them for that next jump certainly would be helpful. Better articulation programs, stronger articulation programs that allow students to enter the four-year and know exactly what courses they need to take once they're there, that don't leave them struggling to figure out, who's who and where do I go and what happened to this do these credits and that credits, that's a real problem for students. So, you know, it's very difficult, but that's why, you know, it may be best to work as closely as we can with the main the universities that our students transfer to. But that's where that marginalization comes in, because you're right. I mean, I know it and I see it and I feel it, that, you know, the universities, they have the rules. You know, your students have to do A, B, C, and D. The community college has to follow those rules. And, you know, so there's some policy issues that I would like to see done in some time, but at this point, I mean, that's the way it is.
Okay, thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Dr. Hagedorn. I want to echo what Dr. Arena said, I think, and what Dr. Chavez said. I think so much of what you have provided here is going to give us food for thought for quite some time, especially with the kind of program that we have. So at this point, we're going to turn to our college reports, but I want to thank you again for joining us this afternoon, and we look forward to hearing more from you in the future.
Sure, it's my pleasure. And thank you, and I wish all of you the best and happy holidays.